Hi Year 11s, good to see you again, even though this is only a one-way camera. Obviously, we all know the situation with regards to your exams, and I can well imagine that there's very little interest in necessarily simply following along with the syllabus and hoping that either there's an exam at the end of it or not, because it seems like at this point in time there won't be one, and therefore we are sticking with the predicted grades that we've come up with for you based on the work you've done so far, your PPEs, your mock exams, and so on. So that doesn't really change. However, it would be remiss of me not to continue to teach when there's so much more to learn. And one of the things I feel like we could really develop over a very brief series of lessons, and probably quite enjoyably, is more practice at creative writing. So the creative writing aspect of the exams, on one hand, is always a bit of a challenge, and I feel like when we do it, it doesn't matter what the stimuli might be in that paper, we often fall into sort of quite typical traps. So it being too narrative, it being too descriptive, or it being too heavy on dialogue, or one of those the classic flaws that people have when they start writing creatively. Now, I'm not gonna sit here and as a tell you I'm a $1 million selling author or whatever, but I'm going to tell you that I've got a lot of experience in creative writing, and I've done a lot of things across the various media, both on stage and in print, that will hopefully benefit you and will actually give you both a leg up in terms of your creative writing, but also make it maybe more enjoyable and something you'd like to do in the future. So don't think of these necessarily as the same thing as the lessons we had in the classroom, but they're more workshops, if you like, to just give you a bit more inspiration, a bit more craft to your creative writing. I really do hope that plenty of you, I guess, play along. Obviously, you're not going to be that compelled to, and I would understand that. However, I'm hoping we can reinvigorate that interest in creative writing that you would definitely have had, if not recently, then certainly at a younger age. So this lesson, this first class, is about the first part of our series of lessons on characterization. The idea of creating a character who is believable, interesting, and detailed is hard, because if you think about any of the characters you love and you're interested in, they are extraordinary people for some reason, and that makes them less believable. But yet there is something about them that resonates and draws you in and makes you feel like you can emote with them, you can understand them. Whether they're heroes or villains, or somewhere in between, there has to be something that lands with you. So we're going to try and develop that skill in a step-by-step basis. And the first thing I'm going to ask you to do is read through or listen along to this this character being described, his or her actions, and I want you to try and think of one word that would sum them up. So the tips of his fingers rubbed against the deep grooves on his cheek. The mark was a part of him now, a permanent reminder of what happened, of what they did. His eyes darted between each of them. He pulled his navy baseball cap down low over his face and moved towards them. Right, you need to think about that character and what one word, what adjective would you use to describe them. All right. Now, with these videos, like I've done with other classes, my advice is look at the challenge, pause the video, then when you're ready, come back. And if there's in the Year 11 type stuff, I'm not going to necessarily tell you you're right or wrong. I'm going to give you my opinion, and you can either agree or disagree or take it on board. So I pause your video now, try and answer that question, and then we'll come back to it when you unpause the video. So give it a go. Okay, so now you've unpaused it, you might look at it and think about this character, and there's indicators on one extreme of being someone who is dangerous and deadly. The idea of perhaps a scar on their cheek would suggest they've lived a life of adventure, and his eyes darting between people suggests us like a about to pounce or about to act. So that's quite interesting. And he does something before he moves. He didn't just move towards them, walk towards them. He moved, and the idea of that perhaps is quite it suggests some kind of foreboding of something that's bad's going to happen. However, if you were to read it in a different tone of voice, so it might be the case that he's looking at those people, that could be a child and they're his parents, and he is looking to them almost in a sense of wanting to be close to them. So the other very tactile tips of fingers is good, because that tells us them quite close. A cheek is obviously something like a rosy cheeked child, perhaps. Now there's a mark on their face. Maybe the parents hit them, or maybe the parents have been there and rescued them from something that they were the cause of. So it could be interpreted in a number of ways, but it's more likely to be perhaps a kind of Robert Ludlum novel where it's a more dangerous kind of person. Essentially, characterization as a skill is to employ strategies using the show not tell techniques that we've talked about in the past to develop that character. So we did a little bit of show not tell about setting, which we can recap later on. But this is now using that same technique to develop an idea of a character. So one of the things that you can do in your description of a character is not just describe what they look like, which is fine, but a little bit obvious maybe, and also didn't give the reader very much to do. Because a reader we don't just buy books and read stories because we have nothing else to do. You read it because you actually want something from it. It's the same. I see the same as people, filling crosswords because they want to solve a puzzle. They want to make that pattern complete. They like the idea of order in the world, and so you want someone to work for understanding. You don't want to confuse them by having no information, and you don't want to give them everything and say, there you go, it's done. You want to think about it. It's got to be a balance. So ways in which you can do it with the character are description of body language, and I use that a lot in How I Am, just because on a video you have to use body language a lot to get across the message. Their appearance, yes, so clothes, hairstyles, anything sort of interesting or unique or different. A description of how they're moving. I remember the story that Sean Connery got the role of James Bond in Goldfinger. Dr. No, because Barbara Broccoli, who's the husband of Cubby Broccoli, who's the producer, saw Sean Connery, I'm going to say on a catwalk modelling shoot. I'm sure you can correct me in the comments later. But she said he walks like a panther or like a leopard, and it was like the idea of this reserve, this control, but also danger was perfect for that particular character. So for James Bond, that's ideal. And so thinking about how they move, using our figurative language skills to describe that is going to help make that person really spring off the page. What are their inner thoughts and feelings? I don't like necessarily recommending this technique to say, oh, they thought this and then they thought that, because it's boring. And the worst thing anything can be is boring. If a book is boring, people won't read it. If a character is boring, people don't care. So the inner thoughts and feelings need to be displayed in a way that is something subtle. So it might be a curl of the lip, it might be a tick, it might be a click of the fingers, it could be something small. It might just tidy their watch up, they might pop their collar, something that suggests their brain is working and that they're thinking or feeling something that is going to help us understand them a bit more. So what are they actually doing? No character, even Forrest Gump, no character genuinely spends the whole of your story sat on a bench or in, let's say it's Misery, laying in a bed. They actually do something. Forrest Gump tells a story, and that's who he is. That defines him as a storyteller. And the stories may be true, they may be false, we never know, it doesn't really matter. It's a good film, it's a good book. So what they're doing is important. What they say in the tone of voice they use. Now that is tricky when it's writing to communicate a tone, but you have to assume that the reader will understand. So the choice of words is key. The word people land on is key. So as well as that sort of syntax is going to be important for you. Using our figurative or symbolic language, so objects or settings, or you always think back to the girl in the red dress in Schindler's List, but that's a particularly clear visual bit of imagery. I think using that in writing is important because those symbols often carry great cultural weight. So windows and doors have particular impact, as does aspects of the weather. The idea of the open road. If I said the open road, doesn't just mean there was a road. It means the idea of freedom and potential and opportunity, and the grass always being greener somewhere else. So even the road can have an important symbolic meaning. And then their interaction with other people. So we talked about the interaction between objects and the world around them in our lesson, all about showing, not telling. And the same is the case with people. How do they interact with things or people around them? And that can also be what people say about them. So I look back to, as we're teaching Macbeth Year 8, that the first time we hear about Macbeth, aside from the title, is in the account from the sergeant about how brutal and bloodthirsty he is in battle. So that already sets up what the character is like, because someone else has said it, and that's also more trustworthy than if the character themselves said it. Right, I'm going to add a link to this to a very short video, which is the first scene in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone when Professor Snape arrives into the classroom. And what I want you to do is come up with your first impressions. If you've seen it or if you haven't, it doesn't really matter. It's just important to think about, rather than, oh, this is a nice film and I'm enjoying it and it's great, look at Harry Potter and la la la. It's, what does this character do and what do they say and how do they behave to create an impression? How does the blend of the director and the author come together, and the actor I should say, come together to create this character? So have a pause this video, watch that video, and then come back and write down those first impressions. Just before you go on, I should say, I wouldn't be surprised if you don't have your Year 11 English books, or if you do have them, you perhaps don't have much space in them, and that's more about academia than this, which is more about creativity. So I'd argue that you should have a separate notebook for this, but I'll let you decide how you want to manage it. So pause the video, watch that video, and then when you're ready, come back. Right, so hopefully you got an impression of the character there that Alan Rickman played, which of sort of menace, authority. He spoke very little, very calmly, very slowly, and that says a lot about a person. Obviously, me in front of a camera is different to me in a classroom, so I speak in a very different way. I kind of arguably might ramble less than I would in a classroom, perhaps, but nonetheless, it tells you about a person. So your impression of Snape is probably not only just how he speaks and his interaction with the students, but what's he wearing? How does he flick that coat back, the cape, if you like? Why would someone do that? And you might then start making inferences about why a character does that, and that starts to make your character more interesting. So maybe this is a practiced thing that the young Professor Snape, when he was just a second year PGCE student or whatever, and he's coming to Hogwarts, doesn't have the gravitas that he does now. So initially, you need to create something that draws attention to him and suddenly makes everyone realise he's walking into the room. You need to be quiet now. So something around that would be quite a good way of creating a character with more intrigue. So in the high level narrative writing, like I've said before, it's about showing, not telling, with the character and with that individual. And if you're creating a character who's dangerous or has a particularly risk, is it not that risk averse, but someone who's quite, like a kind of Jack Reacher type character, then you might describe them as dangerous, and that's fine, but that's not high level. High level stuff is appearance, interactions, actions, behaviour, decisions, and those are the things that are going to make that person really jump out the page and make them come to life. Okay, your final task, just to really start putting the ideas we've had here into practice yourselves, and therefore practicing writing, practicing characterization, is I've given you 4 items here. A torn photo of what looks like a man and a woman. There's what is now probably like an old iPhone. A ticket, a British Airways ticket, doesn't say, I can't see, doesn't say where. Anyway, and a ring. You're going to characterize or create a character called Joe, and this successful professional man perhaps has a dark secret. These 4 items are the things that we find in Joe's pocket. Using show not tell and writing in the third person, you now need to start the beginning of a story that tells us about Joe without telling us. So you show us, using the information you have and the things he has in his pocket, what he's all about. Where might this story go? Where might you take this story? So what I'm going to do is put this all goes up in Google Classroom, as you will have seen, and I'm going to ask you to submit your creative writing ideas. I'm happy to give you one-to-one feedback on that. So any of your characterizations of Joe, I will come back to you on and we'll develop. There'll be a second lesson on characterization that will take the basics that we've picked up on today and go further using this character. So if you're going to do the second part, make sure you've done this particular exercise, as that's going to really help you as we go through. So thanks for watching. Hopefully see you again soon, and you found this to be beneficial.